She screamed at me on my own driveway, waving a clipboard like a weapon, swearing she controlled my life. What she didn't know was that one signature buried in county records would turn her authority into dust, expose decades of HOA corruption, and make the entire neighborhood watch as the loudest Karen they'd ever crowned was stripped of power in a single afternoon. Subscribe now, because this story proves that sometimes the quiet homeowner wins by letting the truth speak last. The day I moved in was supposed to be simple, just boxes and sweat and the quiet satisfaction of owning my first home, a modest but solid house at the edge of a polished suburban neighborhood where lawns were trimmed like magazine covers and mailboxes lined up like soldiers, and I was unloading the last couch when a sharp voice cut through the summer air like a siren. "You can't park that there," and I turned to see her, clipboard clutched to her chest, blonde helmet hair unmoving, eyes already narrowed with judgment, a woman who looked like she'd been waiting all morning for someone to correct, and before I could even say hello she launched into it, informing me that my moving truck violated HOA rules, that my grass was half an inch too long, that the paint color on my shutters was pending review, and that if I didn't comply immediately I'd be fined, her words tumbling over each other with practiced cruelty as neighbors peeked through curtains, and I calmly told her I didn't think I was part of the HOA, that my realtor had said this house was outside it, and that maybe there'd been a mistake, but she laughed, a sharp sound, and said everyone here was in the HOA, that she was the president, and that ignorance wouldn't save me. Then she stepped onto my driveway without permission and started taking photos of my license plate, and something in me snapped just enough to straighten my spine but not enough to shout, because I'd spent years watching people like her feed on reactions, so instead I smiled politely and said I'd look into it, and that infuriated her more than yelling would have, because she wanted control, she wanted submission, and as she stormed off she promised fines, liens, even eviction, and the neighbors' whispers followed her like a parade, and that night, sitting on a mattress on the floor surrounded by boxes, I pulled out my closing documents and reread every line, and there it was again in black and white, the property legal description ending just before the HOA boundary, a strange leftover parcel from decades ago when the development had been planned but one stubborn owner had refused to join, a man who'd insisted on independence and recorded it properly, and as I traced that line with my finger I felt something settle in my chest, not anger but certainty, because the truth was on my side, and the next morning she was back, earlier this time, pounding on my door like she owned it, screaming about violations already recorded overnight, waving a printed notice with my name misspelled, and when I opened the door she didn't even let me speak before threatening legal action, so I held up my hand and told her calmly that my house was not in the HOA, that she was trespassing, and that she needed to leave, and the look on her face was something between disbelief and rage, like I'd broken a script she'd been following for years, and she accused me of lying, said she'd been president for 12 years and knew every house, said she'd put liens on properties before and ruined people who crossed her, and then she did something that would later undo her completely. She shoved the notice into my chest and said, "Sign it or else," and I didn't touch it. I told her to leave again, and when she didn't I called the non-emergency line and asked for an officer to remove a trespasser, and that's when the neighbors really came out, phones raised, murmurs rising, because no one had ever called the police on her before. And when the officer arrived and asked what was going on she tried to take control of him too, explaining HOA authority like it was law, but the officer asked for documentation, and when she couldn't produce anything proving my house was subject to her rules he turned to me, and I handed him my deed, and right there on my porch he read the boundary description and told her politely that my property was not part of the HOA and that she needed to leave immediately, and the silence that followed was thick and delicious, her mouth opening and closing, her authority evaporating in front of witnesses. But instead of backing down she doubled down, shouting that this would be corrected, that mistakes happened, that she'd have her lawyer fix it, and she stormed off again, but the damage was done, because neighbors had seen her be wrong, and power like hers only works when people believe it's absolute, and over the next few days things escalated in quiet, insidious ways, anonymous complaints to the city about my trash cans, a tow truck called for my car parked on my own driveway, flyers slipped under my door warning of community standards, and each time I documented everything, dates, times, photos, videos, because I understood now that this wasn't about rules, it was about control, and control always leaves a paper trail, and when I went to the county records office to pull historical plats to reinforce my position I discovered something far bigger than my own situation, a series of boundary amendments filed years ago by the HOA, small encroachments here and there, properties quietly absorbed into their authority without proper owner consent, fines levied, liens placed, homes foreclosed, all based on the assumption that no one would challenge them, and my house, sitting stubbornly outside the line, was a flaw in their system, and I realized Karen hadn't just been wrong about me, she'd been wrong on purpose about others. And that's when the next twist came, because a woman 2 doors down knocked on my door late one evening, eyes nervous, and whispered that she'd heard about the police, that she thought her house might not be in the HOA either, but she'd been paying fines for years out of fear. And once she spoke, others followed, quietly at first, then in small groups, bringing letters, notices, stories of intimidation, of selective enforcement, of favoritism, of Karen's friends getting passes while others were fined into silence. And together we compared documents, and the pattern became undeniable. And when Karen announced an emergency HOA meeting to address boundary misinformation, I attended, even though I wasn't required to, and I sat in the back while she ranted about threats to community order, about outsiders undermining values. And when she opened the floor for questions, I stood and calmly asked her to explain the recorded boundary amendments that lacked owner signatures. And the room shifted, because she hadn't expected facts, and she dismissed me, tried to shout me down, but another neighbor stood, then another, and soon the meeting turned, voices rising not in anger but in realization, and someone called for an audit. And Karen laughed until the HOA's own attorney, pale and sweating, asked for a recess. And within weeks the investigation began, uncovering misuse of funds, illegal fines, falsified minutes, and Karen's 12-year reign unraveled faster than anyone expected. She resigned, for health reasons, then faced civil suits, and the HOA was forced to redraw its boundaries correctly, refunding thousands in illegally collected fines. And as for me, the house not in the HOA became a symbol, not because I fought loudly, but because I refused to be bullied quietly. And the final twist came months later when a for sale sign went up in Karen's yard. Her house, once the nerve center of control, now just another property. And on moving day I watched from my porch as her truck blocked the street, and a neighbor politely asked her to move it because it violated city parking rules, and she complied without a word, eyes down, authority gone. And I realized then that the sweetest victory wasn't revenge, it was balance, because neighborhoods aren't meant to be ruled by fear. And sometimes all it takes to bring down a screaming Karen with a clipboard is a calm voice, a clear deed, and the courage to say, "This house isn't yours to control."